going to mix things up a little bit today and try a completely different medium, comic books. Now, it's no longer all about Spider-Man and Superman. You can walk into a comic book shop like the Beguiling here and find shelves full of Jane Austen and Shakespeare. The topic of the day is literary comics. Hi, I'm Justine and this is Bookends. Today we're going to look at a comic book series called Kill Shakespeare, created by Anthony Del Col and Connor McCreary. It's all based on Shakespearean characters. The villains and the heroes are all trying to find Shakespeare and get control of his quill. I'm going to chat with Anthony today as well as Peter, owner of the Beguiling. So let's go on in. So I got Anthony Del Col with me here, one of the creators of Kill Shakespeare. I really have to ask you, the first question that I want to ask you is, what in the world were you thinking going after Shakespeare?
Well, I mean, Connor and myself, the two, my other co-creator, we've always been huge fans of Shakespeare. I mean, I've loved Shakespeare since high school. The first reading of Merchant of Venice in grade 9, using Cole's notes, and with good teachers in high school. And so I've always been a fan. And we came up with the idea about 7 or 8 years ago. We were brainstorming ideas for video games, of all things, and the title Kill Bill came up, the Quentin Tarantino film. We thought, yeah, that would make a great video game. But I'm sure someone's already done it. But then we thought, well, what if you replace the Bill like David Carradine, get rid of David Carradine and put another Bill in there? And we went through, could it be like Bill Shatner? Well, could it be anyone else? Billy Baldwin. And then we thought Bill Shakespeare. And we thought, wow, that's fantastic. And it would be all of his characters together in the same, whoa. You had that one moment, that one moment in your life where you're like, that is an amazing idea.
And that's how you came up with the title, because there's been a lot of talk on how brilliant this title is, and I mean I'm guessing in a comic book series that's crucial.
Oh, it's crucial in marketing of anything. I mean, whether it's a film or a comic book or a TV series or video game. I mean, that title is great, and I mean the title pretty much. It's provocative, but it also works on another level in that we're trying to kill the general perceptions of Shakespeare. The general perceptions that Shakespeare is something that's only read by, academics and must be performed as, come hither, Titus. And that's why people really find it boring, whether it's adults or whether it's 15-year-old kids in school. We're trying to kill those general perceptions and show that Shakespeare and his characters are actually really, really cool.
So when you were actually putting this together, did you go through all of the plays, read through them, pick the characters? I mean, that must have been a huge undertaking to decide how to mesh all of this together into one.
It was and it wasn't. I mean, the characters just kind of naturally came to us. I mean, Connor always likes to joke about how the characters basically jumped off the page and basically like grabbed our necks and said, we want in on this. And then with respect to going through all the stories, we actually we made a deliberate decision not to go and reread all the plays, because we're trying to make the story work on 2 levels. One, the first level being those that love Shakespeare, that they can get into this and they love the references and the quotations and the way we kind of play with the what if scenarios with these characters. But we also may want to make it as accessible for everyone.
Now you've touched on some of the process behind this. I find that, putting together a comic book is completely different than writing, say, a novel. More like a business. Would you say that it's more like running a business?
Well, I mean,
how has that process worked for you guys?
Well, we've treated this as a business since day number one ourselves, because our goal with this was to be able to retain as much control on the property as possible. Because this is our first comic book venture, that we've never been involved in the graphic novel industry before. So we wanted to be able to have as much input and say in it. So what we did was, even before we got a publishing deal, we went out and we raised some private equity so we could pay for the marketing costs, the ad costs, overhead, and but more importantly, the production. Because as you say, it has to be treated as a business, because Connor and I can't draw. We can't draw a lick. That's just it's not part of our core strengths. So we wanted to bring on an artist that could, and we needed to be able to afford someone like that. So when we brought on Andy Belanger, we were able to actually, afford his rate. And Andy's been a great fit for the project.
Would you say that was like a crucial point in putting this project together? Because I mean, when you look through these in comic books, the visuals are really important. Would you I don't even know. Do you think that the visuals are more important than the writing itself?
Depends on who you talk to. A lot of people buy comics and graphic novels based just on the artist. They might not even like the story, but they just love to look at the pictures. Whereas there are some people that it's mainly focused on the story, and the artist second. So there's always that competition between the two. And I mean, when you're able to find a nice blend between them, which hopefully we think we found with Kill Shakespeare, I mean, that's exactly what you want.
Now, what do you think Shakespeare, has this ever crossed your mind? What would Shakespeare think of this comic series?
Well, I think he'd pat us on the back. I think he'd take us out for a drink to congratulate us, and then he'd sue us.
Really?
But that's okay, because he told us to kill all the lawyers anyway, so I mean, at the end of the day, it would be a moot point. No, I think Shakespeare, when you look at it, we always like to say he was the greatest aggregator of all time. Mm-hmm. I mean, because he didn't create his own stories himself. I mean, he borrowed them from other people. This is, of course, under the assumption that he actually did write his own plays. But no, I mean, Romeo and Juliet was not an original story. He just took that, adapted it, and put into his own type of production. Same thing with Hamlet, same thing with everything else. So, we're kind of evoking that same spirit with
mm-hmm.
Kill Shakespeare.
If he lived in the 21st century rather than, back in the day, what do you think he would be doing now? He wouldn't necessarily be a playwright, but, would he be after Broadway, do you think, or TV, or all kinds of media?
The thing about Shakespeare is a lot of people perceive him as just, something that he writes stuff for academics. He writes stuff for schools. But that's not really the case. Shakespeare was the greatest populist of all time. I mean, he wrote his stories and his productions so they could be performed for, the royalty that had their own private balconies, as well as for the common folk that would play, like a ducat or two and have to stand in the mud or sit in the mud to watch his productions. So if you look at it today, I mean, he would be Steven Spielberg, or he would be James Cameron. He'd be doing feature films. But because he was so smart in terms of his storytelling, he wouldn't just allow himself to do just one format or one medium. I mean, he'd do films, he would do video games. I think he'd love to do comic books. He would do plays, he'd do musicals. He'd be all over the place. He'd be a one-man studio.
Okay, wait, I have one more question for you.
Sure.
I noticed that sort of later on, I think it's by issue 8 or something, you finally include Romeo.
Yeah, yes, we do, yes.
And I don't know if it's just me, but I find that most people think of Romeo as the suck, the Shakespearean character that maybe you don't like. Why'd you guys, decide, we'll include Romeo?
It's funny that you asked that because not only do people say that about Romeo, but more importantly, they say that about Juliet. That's one of the common reactions when people hear about who we've included, and they ask, especially females, they ask, why did you include Juliet? Why didn't you include Beatrice or Kate or any of these other characters? And I think one of the reasons is that although it's not perceived to be his best play, I mean, Romeo and Juliet is his most famous play. Mm-hmm. So we just really like this concept of having Juliet survive her ordeal with Romeo, meet Hamlet, fall in love with a reverse balcony scene, which you talked about yesterday, and then have Romeo show up. So for us, I mean, it was just like this great love triangle where, almost like Casablanca, where, she falls in love with someone with the belief that her first love is dead, but wait a minute, he's still alive. So I mean, what happens and who does she choose and what comes out of that?
Well, you have to read it to find out. Anthony, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. So now I've got Peter with me, owner of the Beguiling, a comic book store here in Toronto. So just to start off, I mean, this comic book medium, you were saying to me earlier that it's a completely different medium from books and novels. How would you compare the audience? The people who read comic books, people who read novels?
Years ago, there wouldn't have been nearly as much overlap as we would have seen, but these days, the overlap is pretty extreme. People who enjoy reading as an activity make that jump to comics pretty easily, and the fascination with given characters or given subgenres within comics tends to segment very much like the fascination or fandom within fiction. That there are all sorts of little pockets. Unlike when I was a kid, there was a superhero pocket, and that was about it. But now comics are as diverse as the world of fiction and prose.
If you walk around in your store in particular, you won't find a lot of superhero comics. We've been kind of moving away from that, right?
We have a huge section of superhero comics, but we keep it tucked away on the second floor, so it isn't the first thing you see when you come in the shop. We like to sort of put our best foot forward with comics that would be very much the equivalent of contemporary literature or some of our more avant-garde writing, and really sort of make sure that the first thing people see when they come in expands their idea as to what comics might be. But if it is a superhero comic someone has a hankering for, we are more than happy to supply.
Now, this idea of literary mashup, like Kill Shakespeare, like fables, mixing in all these fairy tale characters, that seems to be a growing trend. Why does it work so well within comics?
I think it's the visual nature of the comics medium. People like to see these characters brought to life in fleshed out in a way that they have not seen before. I mean, obviously, people have seen film adaptations of many of their favorite works of literature, but it's a lot cheaper to produce a comic than it is to produce a film.
So you have some other recommendations here.
So for someone that really enjoys the very specifics of Kill Shakespeare, we've already mentioned fables. It's a natural, and in that case, we're dealing not with the characters of Shakespeare, but the characters of all fairy tales, and is very much someone who enjoys seeing existing characters they're familiar or just played with in a new setting and with new stories. This is kind of the perfect thing for that.
So fables, for anyone who doesn't know it, is a mashup of fairy tale characters.
Yes, it's fairy tale, and not just mashed together, but aged up into a much more adult behavior amongst these fairy tale characters. The other thing that I would like to recommend to people who are interested in this is something that is more along the lines of the metafictional aspects of Kill Shakespeare. So you've got characters that are not just put together, but are very self-aware of an author character. And the person who has done that sort of thing probably the best in comics is Grant Morrison with a series called Animal Man. This is very interesting because it touches on all sorts of animal rights issues. One reason it was very popular at the time, also astounding artwork beginning to end on his run, but his writing and his sort of injection of himself as an author presence into the work and the characters, not just Animal Man, a fairly minor superhero before Grant Morrison got his hands on it, but even characters such as Coyote and the Roadrunner, and sort of them being self-aware of who they might be as characters and how they fit into this world of comics. Lastly, I wanted to show you what is probably the one of the most clever and succinct collections of literary mashups in comics, but in a very different way. And this is not just taking a bunch of characters from literature and making a comic of them. It is taking specific works of literature and specific classics of the comic form and turning them into a single work. So in this case,
who might you see in here?
You might see Wuthering Heights done as an EC Comics tale, or you might see Macbeth done as a Mary Worth comic strip. You might see Blondie, the Book of Genesis done as a series of Blondie strips. My personal favorite is the Camus' The Outsider done as 8 covers from Action Comics circa 1950. We also have Crime and Punishment done as a Batman story.
Robin looks like a girl.
Yeah, that's not unusual. The Scarlet Letter done as a little Lulu comic.
All kinds of mashup.
Yes, the more you know about your literature or your comics, the more you appreciate this, but even someone with a casual awareness of any of them will get a lot out of it.
Peter, thanks so much for your time today.
Not at all.
So you can find all the info on these comics as well as Kill Shakespeare on our website, bookendstv.com.